So this is our third class with our brother Jed Dillingham. The title of this class is "The Palace is Not for Man," and the reading is going to be taken from 1 Chronicles 29, verses 1 through 22. First Chronicles 29, verses 1 through 22. Furthermore, David the king said unto all the congregation, Solomon my son, whom alone God hath chosen, is yet young and tender, and the work is great, for the palace is not for man, but for the Lord God. Now I have prepared with all my might for the house of my God, the gold for the things to be made of gold, the silver of the things of silver, and the brass for the things of brass, and iron for the things of iron, and wood for the things of wood, onyx stones and stones to be set glistering stones, and of divers colors, and all manner of precious stones and marble stones in abundance. Moreover, because I have set my affection to the house of my God, I have of mine own proper good of gold and silver, which I have given to the house of my God, over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house. Even 3,000 talents of gold, of the gold of Ophir, and 7,000 talents of refined silver, to overlay the walls of the houses withal. The gold for the things of gold, and the silver for the things of silver, and for all manner of work to be made by the hands of the artificers. And who then is willing to consecrate his service this day unto the Lord? Then the chief of the fathers and princes of the tribes of Israel, and the captains of thousands and of hundreds, with the rulers of the king's work, offered willingly, and gave for the service of the house of God of gold 5,000 talents, and 10,000 drams, and of silver 10,000 talents, and of brass 18,000 talents, and 100,000 talents of iron. And they with whom precious stones were found gave them to the treasure of the house of the Lord by the hand of Jehiel the Gershonite. Then the people rejoiced, for that they offered willingly, because with perfect heart they offered willingly to the Lord. And David the king also rejoiced with great joy. Wherefore David blessed the Lord before all the congregation. And David said, Blessed be thou, Lord God of Israel our Father, forever and ever. Thine, O Lord, is the greatness, and the power, and the glory, and the victory, and the majesty. For all that is in the heaven and in the earth is thine. Thine is the kingdom, O Lord. Thou art exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come of thee, and thou reignest over all. And in thine hand is power and might, and in thine hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. Now therefore, our God, we thank thee and praise thy glorious name. But who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able to offer so willingly after this sort? For all things come of thee, and of thine own have we given thee. For we are strangers before thee, and sojourners, as were all our fathers. Our days on the earth are as a shadow, and there is none abiding. O Lord, our God, all this store that we have prepared to build thee an house for thine holy name cometh of thine hand, and is all thine own. I know also, my God, that thou triest the heart, and hast pleasure in uprightness. As for me, in the uprightness of mine heart, I have willingly offered all these things, and now have I seen with joy thy people, which are present here, to offer willingly unto thee. O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, our fathers, keep this forever in the imagination of the thoughts of the heart of thy people, and prepare their hearts unto thee. And give unto Solomon my son a perfect heart, to keep thy commandments, thy testimonies, and thy statutes, and to do all these things, and to build the palace for the which I have made provision. And David said to all the congregation, Now bless the Lord your God. And all the congregation blessed the Lord God of their fathers, and bowed down their heads, and worshipped the Lord and the king. And they sacrificed sacrifices unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings unto the Lord on the morrow after that day, even 1,000 bullocks, 1,000 rams, 1,000 lambs, with their drink offerings and sacrifices in abundance for all Israel. And did eat and drink before the Lord on that day with great gladness. And they made Solomon the son of David king the second time, and anointed him unto the Lord to be the chief governor, and Zadok to be the priest. So I'll be pleased to call Brother Jed forward to give us the third class.
Thank you, Brother Josh, and good afternoon, brothers and sisters and young people. I understand that since we were able to start a half hour early, I can talk for a half hour extra. So even though this is the graveyard shift and everybody is trying to go to sleep and digest, hopefully we can keep everyone's attention with what we have to conclude our day with today as we look at David's role in preparing for the palace. So we concluded our final class without going to 2 Samuel 8, which would have been far earlier in David's life than where we are in 1 Chronicles 29. So if we can just go back to 2 Samuel 8 to complete our thoughts there before jumping forward to nearly the end of David's life. I wanted to highlight the response of David after receiving these wonderful promises in 2 Samuel 7, which thousands of years later we still thrill to look at. That's the power of these promises. They weren't given to an individual and fulfilled, and we just look back and see the faithfulness of God to fulfill his promises, but we still thrill to them today for the inclusion that they offer to those who follow the one greater than David, and the participation in those things which are yet to come. And David's response was not a temporal response. It wasn't something related to the things of this life. He didn't respond, as we said, to the promises given to him of a house and a seed to sit on his throne forever with thankfulness for the provision that had been made physically for him, but it was for the forever, for that, as we spoke about last night in the CYC class, not the forever as in for eternity, because that's not what forever means here, but it means for the age. So the throne of David will be established, and the seed of David will sit on that throne for the age. As we know from 1 Corinthians 15, that at that time, at the end of the kingdom, Christ will no longer sit as king, but he will hand over the kingdom to his Father. So he's no longer sitting on the throne of David if he's handing over the kingdom to his Father. So there will come a day when that throne is not needed anymore. But for the age, for that precious time of the kingdom, the seed of David will sit upon it. And David is thrilled by that. He sees that he had in his heart to build a home for Yahweh in the midst of his people. And David says, Yahweh says to him, I'm going to build a house for you that will rule over my people. A descendancy that will reach its culmination in the Lord Jesus Christ to rule over my people. And how much greater is it what God can do for man than what man can do for God? Though David's heart was correct in what he desired to do, it couldn't even approach to the wonders of what God would do for him. So we have at the end of 2 Samuel 7 that wonderful prayer of thanksgiving that David offers to Yahweh in response to those great promises he's received. And immediately upon the conclusion of this interchange, of this conversation between David and his God, we read in 2 Samuel 8, And after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Metheg-Ammah out of the hand of the Philistines. And he smote Moab and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured he to put to death. Verse 3, David smote also Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, as he went to recover his border at the river Euphrates. And David took from him 1,000 chariots, and 700 horsemen, and 20,000 footmen. Verse 5, when the Syrians of Damascus came to succor Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David slew of the Syrians 22,000 men. David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus. And we move down through this chapter, see that David has shifted his focus. Because at the beginning of 2 Samuel 7, it says, it came to pass when the king sat in his house, and Yahweh had given him rest round about from all his enemies, that he said, I should build a house for Yahweh. His enemies aren't bothering him. They're leaving him alone. They're terrified of this divinely protected emperor in Jerusalem, and they will not, as it were, poke the bear. And David says, I'm going to use this opportunity to build a house for Yahweh. And Yahweh says, it's not for you to do this. He says, all right, I'm going to go take the fight to them. They're not going to come fight me because they're scared of God's protection on me. I'm going to take the fight to them. And he has a purpose behind all of this, which we'll get into as we continue through our class. But this was how his faith motivated him to act. He didn't simply look at the promises and thrill over them and remain in his house at rest. He went out and he got to work. He said, well, if God has a work for me to do, I've been preparing for this for nearly 50 years, but there's more to do, and I have more work to do, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to get to work, and I'm going to continue what I had been doing. I'm going to conquer the nations, and I'm going to seize their wealth and dedicate it to the service that I have been told I'm able to prepare for. So when we jump all the way forward then into 1 Chronicles 29, really 1 Chronicles 29 is the conclusion of quite a long gathering at the end of 1 Chronicles. It starts in chapter 21, perhaps chapter 22 of 1 Chronicles. 22 or 23. I've got my, yes. So in chapter 22, we have David calling Solomon to him and passing on the charge. This is the passing of the torch of the great labor that David has been preparing for and now knows that it's not his to build for approximately 30 years. Yes, he had been preparing for it in abundance before that. I personally believe he had this as his focus throughout his time in exile when he fled from Saul, throughout those 7 years when he reigned in Hebron, and certainly once he is king over all Israel. This is his focus, is to build the house for Yahweh. And it's a very singular focus, and he will not be turned aside from it. And having had that focus his whole life, he knows that it's not his job to fulfill it. God has told him quite clearly, it's not for you. And how much import would he want to give to his son of how powerful this work is that he's to perform? So he calls him in chapter 22 to a specific audience with himself. And we read in verse 3 of the kind of things that he prepared. David prepared iron in abundance for the nails, for the doors of the gates, and for the joinings, and brass in abundance without weight. Also cedar trees in abundance, for the Zidonians and they of Tyre brought much cedar wood to David. And David said, Solomon my son is young and tender. The house that is to be builded for Yahweh must be exceeding magnifical, of fame and of glory throughout all countries. I will therefore now make preparation for it. So David prepared abundantly before his death. So he knew that the day was soon coming when Solomon would have to take over, and he prepared abundantly before his death. I want to make sure that Solomon has the best start possible on this project. Now, by this point, we believe that David has already received the inspired plans of how to build this temple and all the things that are related to it. So he then, in verse 6, calls for Solomon his son and charges him to build an house for Yahweh, God of Israel. And if we turn over in 1 Chronicles 22, verses 9 and 10, we see that the promise is now as well, in a sense, passed on to Solomon conditionally. So verse 9, behold, this is David reciting what Yahweh has told him. Behold, a son shall be born to thee who shall be a man of rest. and I will give him rest from all his enemies round about, for his name shall be Solomon. And I will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. He shall build an house for my name. He shall be my son. I will be his father. I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. Now comes the conditional part. Now, my son, Yahweh be with thee, and prosper thee, and build the house of Yahweh thy God, as he hath said of thee. Only Yahweh give thee wisdom and understanding, and give thee charge concerning Israel, that thou mayest keep the law of Yahweh thy God. Then shalt thou prosper, if thou takest heed to fulfill the statutes and judgments which Yahweh charged Moses with concerning Israel. Isn't that amazing? We've asked the question, perhaps rhetorically and perhaps jokingly at times, what do you get for the man that has everything? You've got Solomon being given everything that he needs to build the temple. We'll see as we go through 1 Chronicles 29, he's given the divinely inspired plans for every single piece of service. Every piece of furniture, the snuffers, the altars, the dishes, the cups, the hooks, everything. And David has it, as it were, in cubby holes in the storage room. Okay, so this gold right here, that's all been measured out and weighed. That's exactly how much gold you need to make these things. And then over here we have the silver. This is the silver that's specifically for these things. It's all been weighed. It's all there for you. So what does Solomon need? He doesn't need to compile any goods. He does go out and get some more wood. And it's interesting that David, after he lists off this vast amount of storehouses that he's piled, he says, you can add there too if you want to. But there's plenty there already. But you can add there too. So what do you get for him? What do we as parents, as actual parents in the ecclesia, or as mothers in Israel, as aunts and uncles who are trying to train up the next generation in the truth, we've been given everything. We can pass on the knowledge, we can pass on the understanding, but what do we want the next generation to have? Above all else, you can hand them all the information, all the data. But without what David asks for his son, it's useless. As he says in verse 12, Yahweh give thee wisdom and understanding. David recognized that though the work has been completely prepared for, and he's handing him over a position where really it's a turnkey operation. At this point, the hewers are already in the mountain cutting stones. I know where we're going to start digging. I know exactly what it's going to start to look like. I've seen the layout. Here's the plans. Here's all the materials you'll need. But you need wisdom to complete the work. You can't do this without the wisdom that God can give. So he says, only Yahweh give thee wisdom and understanding. And when that choice is put before Solomon after his father's death, do you want long life? Do you want riches? Do you want wisdom? He makes the right choice. He says, I want wisdom, because without wisdom, the rest of what you offer is not going to be fulfilled in me. The riches will be wasted. The long life will be spent incorrectly. So the appeal of David to his son is initially recognized as wisdom, and he seeks wisdom. And we see that it's absolutely necessary, especially in a context such as a building project, as this on this scale and for this purpose, but most especially in the lives which we live now as we await our Lord's return. So when we flip a few pages forward now, as we're coming to the end of this assembly that David has, it really starts in 1 Chronicles 23, and then we're given the details through 25, 26, 27 of the courses of the priests and who serves during this month and who serves during that month and who the men are that do it. We can kind of lose our focus and not realize what's going on. But what has happened is David has called Solomon, and he's handing him over all the information that he has about how this service is going to work. Because it's not just a new building. It's not just the tabernacle is now 8 times bigger than it used to be, and it's solid instead of temporary. Everything's going to change. There's going to be new music. There's going to be far more priests in the temple than there ever were in the tabernacle. We have to figure out how everybody's going to serve, because everybody should have the opportunity to serve. So the priests are going to come up by courses. What kind of music are we going to have? There's going to be specific singers that are dedicated to the work for this. David has made the instruments himself that will accompany those singers. So there's a lot to organize. And so throughout these chapters that we're skipping over, David is handing over all this information. Now, okay, this person is going to come up in this month, and his son is this, and his father was that, and they're going to do this, and they've got fields. And he goes through all the detail. It's all there for him. He doesn't have to do anything. Just step in and turn the key. But the amazing thing about this, as we get to chapter 28 and 29, it says in chapter 28, verse 1, David assembled all the princes of Israel, the princes of the tribes, and the captains of the companies that ministered to the king by course, and the captains over the thousands, the captains over hundreds, the stewards over all the substance and possession of the king, and of his sons, with the officers, with the mighty men, and with all the valiant men unto Jerusalem. This is the elite. He's not calling the entire nation, but he's calling all the leaders of every level in the nation, whether they're right up at the top with the king's own sons and the captains over thousands, or whether it be just the valiant men. We might say it's not a low position to be in, but for the class of people that we have here, it seems to be listed at the as the least of the greats. And he calls them all before him because he's going to implore them to do something. And it says in verse 2, then David the king stood up upon his feet. There's no other way to really stand up, is there? Of course you're going to stand up on your feet. So why is it that we're told that he stood up on his feet? Well, let's put it together with the rest of the context of what's actually going on here. For this, we have to go back into 1 Kings. Why is it important? Why does the Spirit, which doesn't waste words, tell us that he stood up upon his feet? 1 Kings chapter 1. We have the context of the first time that David makes Solomon king. And without reading through the whole chapter, we'll jump in and we'll pull a few key verses out, starting at the first verse. And this is actually one of the keyest verses in relation to this. So 1 Kings 1 verse 1. Now King David was old and stricken in years, and they covered him with clothes, but he gat no heat. That word for clothes is bedclothes. That doesn't mean he was walking around with 5 jackets on. That means he was laying in bed and he couldn't get warm. That's how sick he was. His body couldn't produce heat to keep him warm anymore. To the point where they're searching the nation to find somebody who can come and lay with the king to keep him warm, because there's something physically wrong with him. He's quite sick. He's ill. The years which have not been kind to his physical body are taking their toll on him. And they search the country to find someone to come and lie with him to keep him warm. And this is where Abishag, the Shunammite, comes into the story. Of course, we know that as time progresses, Abishag becomes a problem for Solomon, because Adonijah desires her for his wife, in a sense trying to show that he was the right one to be the next king because he had the previous king's concubine. But as you go through the story in 1 Kings 1, we see the relationship of David and the rest of the family and his court, Nathan the prophet and others, seems to be operated out of his bedchambers. Because they don't go up to the king to ask him things, they go in unto the king. And then other people come in unto the king. They don't go up to address the king. But it seems to imply that King David could not get out of bed at this time. That he was, as it were, on his deathbed. And as life is barely being held on to by him, there's tragedy in the kingdom. And Adonijah is anointing himself and putting himself up as king. And they come in, they create this situation where they try to get David to understand how serious this is and what's going on, because he's locked up in his bedroom preparing to die. And he doesn't know what's going on in the nation at this time. So the effort is made to get David to understand that the wrong son is setting himself up as king. Didn't you say, Bathsheba says, that Solomon would be king in your stead? Then why does Adonijah reign? And so, at that time, Nathan comes in and confirms the same thing. Why is it that Adonijah is reigning? And David's heart begins to beat a little faster. and his warmth begins to come back. Well, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. God said that Solomon would be my heir, that Solomon would build the temple. I've been preparing all of this because Solomon is to be my heir. And he reinvigorates in this last year of his life this man who was nearly dead on his bed, who had clothes, bedclothes, blankets, and skins piled on him to try and keep him warm. But you can't keep warm what isn't making heat. He's nearly dead. And by the time we come through 1 Kings 1 to 1 Kings 2, we read in 1 Kings 2 verse 1, "Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die." And that, throughout the first few verses of 1 Kings 2, we have the final charge of David to his son Solomon about how to deal with the wicked people that David did not deal with in his own reign, and how they should be addressed when Solomon takes over. And in verse 10 of 1 Kings 2, "So David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David." But from 1 Kings 1 to 1 Kings 2, we have no record of this great gathering together that we have in 1 Chronicles, the last chapters of 1 Chronicles. So it's my belief, and I think it bears itself out, that what we have in this great assembly in 1 Chronicles, those last chapters of 1 Chronicles, takes place between 1 Kings 1 and 1 Kings 2, when David is nearly in the grave in 1 Kings 1 and gets reinvigorated because he realizes if he doesn't do something, the plan of God perhaps can be delayed or will not work out the way it should. And he moves to act. He moves to be a part of ensuring that the right thing happens at the right time. So when we read back in 1 Chronicles 28, verse 2, that sorry, not 1 Chronicles 28, verse 2. 1 Chronicles 20. And 1 Chronicles? Yes, 1 Chronicles. I seem to have completely lost the passage. Perhaps I'm in 2 Chronicles. When we read that David stood up upon his feet, there is a recognition that these things would not have been possible shortly before that. Right, 1 Chronicles 28, verse 2. "Then David the king stood up upon his feet and said, 'Hear me, my brethren and my people.'" Would it not be an easy thing to do to gather together all those elite when they realize that this is the king, the shepherd king, the great uniting king of Israel, who brought together the factious tribes, who established the empire of Israel in the Middle East? This is going to be the last time he addresses the nation. And the word goes out, "Gather all the great ones in Israel, all the rulers of hundreds and thousands, the captains of the army, the princes of the tribes, the valiant men, bring them to Jerusalem, so that there will be no question of who is being established as my heir and what his job is." And he relays to Solomon, now once again, he's already said it in an audience that we have earlier in 1 Chronicles, he now relays to him once again the great work that's before him, reaffirming it to Solomon and confirming it before the nation that this is the job that you have been prophesied to fulfill. So he recounts in 1 Chronicles 28 and part of 29 the events of 2 Samuel 6, verse 8. He tells them how he had started making preparations for the house before he even asked to build it. That's one of the clues that we have, that David was thinking about this before we're told he was thinking about this. That this was in his heart from a young age, that he was making preparation for this before we're told that he wanted to do it. So he recounts to Solomon and to those in attendance the events of 2 Samuel 6, which is the bringing up of the ark, 2 Samuel 7, which is the giving of the promises to David, and 2 Samuel 8, which is the conquering of the nations and the gathering of the spoil for the preparation of the house. And the desire that he has to do this, if we keep a hand in 1 Chronicles 29, if we turn over to Psalm 132, the desire that he had for this is shown in Psalm 132, a paraphrase, we might say, of which we sang to begin this class in hymn 64. So Psalm 132 is not a terribly long psalm. So we might read through it with emphasis to try to show how David's heart was in relation to seeking a place of rest for Yahweh. And we'll pause for a few times for comments. So Psalm 132, Yahweh, remember David and all his afflictions, how he sware unto Yahweh and vowed unto the mighty God of Jacob, surely I will not come into the tabernacle of my house, nor go up into my bed. I will not give sleep to mine eyes, or slumber to mine eyelids, until I find out a place for Yahweh, and habitation for the mighty God of Jacob. Such echoes from the Song of Moses that talk about establishing a habitation and being brought into the holy habitation of Yahweh. Verse 6, lo, we heard of it at Ephrata, speaking of one of the locations that the ark traveled to in its second set of wanderings, we might say. We found it in the fields of the wood. We will go into his tabernacles. We will worship at his footstool. The footstool is a direct reference to the mercy seat. Verse 8, arise, O Yahweh, into thy rest, thou and the ark of thy strength. Let thy priests be clothed with righteousness, and let thy saints shout for joy. For thy servant David's sake, turn not away the face of thine anointed. Yahweh hath sworn in truth unto David. He will not turn from it. Of the fruit of thy body will I set upon thy throne, if thy children will keep my covenant and my testimony that I shall teach them. Their children shall also sit upon thy throne forevermore. For Yahweh hath chosen Zion. He hath desired it for his habitation. This is my rest forever. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless her provision. I will satisfy her poor with bread. I will also clothe her priests with salvation, and her saints shall shout aloud for joy. There will I make the horn of David to bud. I have ordained a lamp for mine anointed. His enemies will I clothe with shame, but upon himself shall his crown flourish. So given by inspiration to King David, you can see how his heart was so focused on finding a place to put the ark of God's presence among the people. He was willing to not sleep, to not go up to his own bed, to not come into his own tent until he had found where this place was. So dedicated was he to this work. If we turn back to 1 Chronicles 28, we go through verses 4 to 10, and we see that there is the endorsement of Solomon before the people. So it starts in verse 4, but verse 5 is really the one that confirms it before the people, where he says at this great congregation, of all my sons, for Yahweh hath given me many sons, he hath chosen Solomon my son to sit upon the throne of the kingdom of Yahweh over Israel. And he said unto me, Solomon thy son, he shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. There can be no doubt in the nation now. David says, I didn't choose Solomon, Yahweh did. So for you to resist Solomon is to resist the anointed of Yahweh. And who better to stand there than David to show that you should not resist the anointed of Yahweh, the one who would not raise up his hand against Saul, the anointed of Yahweh, when he had opportunity. They would know these almost legends of the king that they had before them. So when he makes that statement, he doesn't say that I chose Solomon. Yahweh has chosen Solomon. And not only to be king, not only to build this house, but to be his own son, to be Yahweh's son. That's what Solomon has been chosen for. So as we go on through the chapter in 1 Chronicles 28, we're going to try to speed up and get to 1 Chronicles 29 and look at some of the information there. We have, as we go through verses 9 and 10, we've already looked at, and 11, we've looked at verses 9 and 10 is where the conditional is repeated. So we had that back in 1 Chronicles 23, the conditional promise that if you do this, then Yahweh will be with you. Verse 11, David gave to Solomon his son the patterns. So this is where the scrolls, as it were, if they were such, with all of the architectural drawings and the measurements and the lists of what materials to use for what, he hands them over. And you just look at what there are patterns for. And really that's the key passage, the key word in this section is the pattern. We see that with the first temple, the first place of worship in the tabernacle, that there was the pattern shown to Moses in the mount. Likewise, there is the pattern shown to David, which he passes on to Solomon. So David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, and of the houses thereof, and of the treasuries thereof, and of the upper chambers thereof, and of the inner parlors thereof, and of the place of the mercy seat, and the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of Yahweh, and of all the chambers round about, of the treasuries of the house of God, and of the treasuries of the dedicated things, also for the courses of the priests and the Levites, and for all the work of the service of the house of Yahweh, and for all the vessels of service in the house of Yahweh. There's nothing left out here. Every tiny little detail is taken care of. And without going into the time to look at the different passages that seem to suggest this, I would say that just as Moses was taken up into the mount and shown the pattern of the tabernacle, the pattern of heavenly things that he was to recreate, and just as Ezekiel is taken up into a mount to see the form of a city and the pattern of the temple of the age to come, I think we could show that David, likewise, was shown the pattern of the temple that he was to be preparing for that would be built by his son. God didn't simply take over his hand and draw out some architectural drawings for him to follow. Didn't just make a list. That's not the way God has ever worked. He shows them. It says to Moses, make sure that you make it according to the pattern that was shown thee. You saw it, Moses. You're the one who's going to be responsible to make sure it's done exactly as you saw it. And so David, likewise, we believe, saw the temple. And not just a stark representation with hollow courts. When Ezekiel is shown the temple in those chapters in the midst, towards the end of Ezekiel, it's a temple in action. It's a temple that's being used. The water is running. The people are there. And there's a specific day that he sees it on, when the glory of Yahweh returns to it. It's not a stark representation or a scale model. It's a temple in use that he sees. And I believe that that is what David was privileged to see as well. That he would be able to say later on, you will be using the instruments that I have made when you're standing here and the singers are over there, because he'd already seen it. He knew who would be holding which instrument. He knew how it would look, how it would operate, who would move where certain things would be stored. But he was never allowed to set foot in it. He was never allowed to see the foundation being set. He was never allowed to offer a prayer towards it or offer a sacrifice in it. But he was allowed to prepare for it. And as he says in 1 Chronicles 29, verse 2, I have prepared with all my might for the house of my God. He hasn't held anything back. Every ounce of his being, every fiber of his strength has gone into preparing for this great work. But he's never going to be allowed to set foot in it. To hear the music being played in there that he has orchestrated. Why is that? Why is it that David is not allowed to participate in those things? Well, we hope to, in our exhortation and our classes tomorrow at the gathering, address that specifically. Because David is the forerunner of the generation which we are in now, which has no temple. And we hope to consider how that plays together tomorrow in our exhortation. But when we look at what the king is able to compile as he goes out and conquers the nations and brings the wealth of the nations to Israel, it's absolutely staggering how much he has. So we're told in 1 Chronicles 29, in verse 4, verse 3, "Moreover, because I have set my affection to the house of my God, I have of mine own proper good, of gold and silver, which I have given to the house of my God, over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house." So we're told earlier in chapter 22, which we'll go back to in a minute, how much he had prepared from what he had gathered from the nations. But over and above that, he says, it's not good enough that I just go out and conquer the nations and bring their goods in. I will not offer an offering that costs me nothing. He still has that principle in his mind. I can go out and conquer the nations and bring all the wealth of the nations in here, but I still haven't done anything. I have to give something of my own, of myself. And that proper good there, if you look that up, it's actually of my own peculiar treasure, the treasure of kings. It's not just gold, but we see in verse 4 that it's the gold of Ophir, the refined, purest gold possible. This is the gold of kings. You wouldn't think that there'd be good gold and bad gold, but even today there's a purification system that's based on nines. And some of us may be familiar with that you can have 2-9 or 3-9 or 4-9 or 5-9 gold, and it's a percentage of purity. Is it 99 or is it 99.9% pure or 99.99% pure? Like, how pure is it? Is it to the 10th, to the 100th, to the 1000th percent pure? And the purer it is, the more valuable it is. And the refiner that can get it to that purity is respected all over the world to be able to get 4-9 gold from their refinery. And so the gold of Ophir that's being referenced here in verse 4 is the finest gold. It's the gold of kings. And we're told that he gave 3,000 talents. Now, if you're not asleep yet, when we try to figure out how much a talent is, you might nod off. There's 7 different kinds of talents that I found. Seems like every empire, every generation seemed to have a talent. There was the Attic talent, the Babylonian talent, the Egyptian talent, the Hebrew talent, the Roman talent, the Greek talent, and they're all different, ranging in weights from 57 pounds up to 130 pounds. And I don't know what kind of pound it is. Because when you go to look up pounds, you have pounds troy, and then you have the other kind of pound that we're more familiar with, which I didn't know had a name for the system, but apparently it's some French name that means the goods of weights, or the Latin means goods of weight. So when you look, if you just pick a number, I picked 90 pounds, troy. How do you convert that to something you know? Okay, well, what's a troy pound? Well, a troy pound is 12 ounces. But it's not, a troy pound isn't the same as a regular pound. Troy pound is lighter than a regular pound. Well, okay, that's because it only has 12 ounces. No, because the troy ounce is actually heavier than the regular ounce. You lost yet? Like, it's just staggering to try and figure this out. So we picked a weight that some handout that I had from an old concordance said that a talent was 91 pounds troy. Okay, we'll stick with that. I might be off by 50%, but just to get an idea. So if you take 91 pounds troy and you convert that to real pounds, incidentally, the troy system is still used to measure precious metals, platinum, gold, silver. They still use that, but they all are the only ones that understand it. The rest of us are kind of in the dark. So you take 91 pounds troy, you convert that to regular pounds. It's approximately 75 pounds, or 34 kilograms, something around there. I can't remember which one was right, but they're both in the same ballpark. What do you compare that to? What does 75 pounds of gold look like? It's one of the densest metals. I'm not sure if it's the densest. But for years, people tried to convert gold, or create gold from lead. Right? That's what the whole concept of alchemy comes from. Well, if I do all of this, I can turn lead into gold. And I heard at one point that they'd figured out how to do it, but it cost more than the gold was worth at the end. So it was kind of ineffective. Maybe with gold prices at $1,600 a troy ounce, it's worth it now, but I doubt it, or they'd be doing it and the price would come down. So okay, so we've got 75 pounds, and we're going to use lead instead of gold. That's approximately 2 car batteries. Okay, so think about the size of the battery in your car, which is mostly lead, a little bit of water, a little bit of plastic, but as far as weight is concerned, it's mostly lead. 1 talent is 2 car batteries. 6,000 car batteries worth of gold. Can you picture that? Can you picture 6,000 car batteries worth of gold? So then you take it to the next step. Okay, if the average, say the average one is around, the average car battery is between 35 and 40 pounds. What's the average size of that? How does that physically look on the table? It's about 10 by 6 by 8. Not very big, right? When you put 6,000 of them together, it's bigger than a shipping container. So 8 foot by 8 foot by 20 foot. It's like a little more than 25 feet, it has to be. But for our imagination purposes, picture like a sea can, right? Like a big blue box, big steel box kind of thing. Of solid gold. That's what David gave. Over and above what he gathered from the nations. Now, I don't remember the name of the brother, but years ago there was a brother in California, and I'm sure there'll be brothers here who could tell me who this was, whose profession was gilding. Like his job was it Maury Stewart? I thought it was Brother Maury Stewart, but then I thought he was in television, and I don't think they went together. Maybe he did it as a hobby or something, I don't know, the television or the gold. But okay, so it was Brother Maury Stewart. And he used to say that as a professional who would apply real 24 karat gold leaf to items for a profession, for a trade, he could work for a whole year with 1 ounce. Because when you're doing gold leaf, take for example these doors on the side here, which have detailed work on them. You'd like to, if you want to gild that, if you want to highlight that with gold leaf, you want the detail to come through. And with gold, you can get it so thin, thinner than paper, and then you use this brush and you tack it on there, and it softens into the grain of the wood and the detail of what you're covering, so that it looks like it's solid gold. But it has greater detail in it than you could get by just carving gold. 1 ounce would keep him busy for a year. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of ounces in this. And the house wasn't that big. It really wasn't. So where did all the gold go? Can you picture a shipping container of solid gold? Well, that's 1 Chronicles 29. That's what David gave of his own proper good. If we go back to see what he had gathered from the nations to 1 Chronicles 22, the 3,000 talents pales in comparison to what he actually gathered from the nations. So after the charge that's given to Solomon in 1 Chronicles 22, in verse 14, he says to Solomon, "Now behold, in my trouble I have prepared for the house of Yahweh 100,000 talents of gold." 33 times more than he gave of his own proper good. So you've got 103,000 talents of gold. That's 34 shipping containers of solid gold. Where did it all go? If you're just overlaying stones and carved artwork on the inside and outside of the temple, you're not pouring molten gold on top of it. You're just putting paper-thin gold leaf on it to highlight it, to protect it, and to accentuate it. You wouldn't even need a half of one of these shipping containers. But that's the zeal of David. He didn't just look at it and say, okay, that's going to be the gold leaf. I don't really need much for that, so this should be plenty. I've got the measures of all the furniture and the altar that's going to be cedar. We'll cover that with gold too, and there's a lot of gold utensils that we'll need. So I should probably get, 103,000 talents. Should probably be enough. It's staggering how much he went and seized from the nations, how much he was willing to give. And that's just the gold. And of all the metals that he gave, the gold was the one he gave the least of. Granted, as you get into different metals, they get lighter, so a talent is bigger. So where's he putting all of this? For 30 years, he's stockpiling the materials for the building of the temple. He has the plans, maybe not immediately 30 years previous to this, but within this time period, he has the plans, and he knows how much he needs. He knows, okay, we're going to need beams this size to go over here. We're going to need, for the floor in here that are made of fir, we'll need planks this size. But he's got far more than he needs. Perhaps that's where some of the materials for David, or for Solomon's own palace come from. When they build the house of pillars that surrounds it, that you have to go through to get up to the Temple of Solomon. There's another passage that says that Solomon made gold and silver as plenteous as stones in Jerusalem. Not in Israel, but in Jerusalem. But the plenteous is, or the as plenteous is in italics. So it's possible, it's just a suggestion, it's possible that some of this gold and silver was used outside of the temple area, perhaps in his own palace, perhaps in the palace courtyard, to accentuate the buildings there as well, to show the association. Because there was definitely a compound of King Solomon's palace, the Hall of Pillars, which had the seat of judgment, and the house of the forest of Lebanon. And there was the way by which Solomon went up to the temple. There was almost you might call it a royal staircase that went up to the temple courtyard. Perhaps those buildings as well benefited from the great collection of precious metals that David had put together to show the connection of the house of David and the house of Yahweh. We don't know exactly what happened to it all, but on the day of dedication, when it says they brought into the storehouses the treasures of the house of Yahweh, that would have been quite a feat, quite an endeavor to fit the treasures of the house of Yahweh inside the storerooms. But it's an example to us of the zeal and the fervor and the unending desire of David to make sure that everything was ready for this house. And that powerful example, as we go through 1 Chronicles 29, is imparted onto the leaders that have been called together. Because as he stands there and he recounts what he has given out of his own peculiar treasure, the abundance of the materials, we're also told that he implores those that are there with him to give likewise. So verse 4 is when we're told, in 1 Chronicles 29, verse 4 is when we're told what he gave and what it was for. And at the end of verse 5, he says, after recounting what he has done, "Who then is willing to consecrate his service this day unto Yahweh?" So he said, "Very well, brethren, now is the time for the free will offering. Whatever you're willing to give, there's no admission charge, there's no fee for participation. Whatever you're willing to give, brethren." And they came up with 5,000 plus talents of silver, 10,000 talents, of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of brass, 100,000 talents of iron, just from the congregation that had come to hear this last address by the king. To the point where when everything is all put together and tallied, they said it can't be numbered how much David put together. You just give up. There's so much. It's far beyond what was needed. And doesn't that echo precisely what happened in the establishment of the tabernacle? Where the Levites had to come and tell Moses and Aaron, tell the people to stop bringing the free will offering. We've got nowhere left to put it. It's too much. That was the desire of the people, to give for the service of their God and the creation of a place for them to dwell with, for him to dwell with them. And that was the desire of David, and it was imparted to his people as well. We see as well that other nations donate their materials, their goods, though perhaps unknowingly. We see that going back to 2 Samuel 8, as David continues in that great, and this is years before, as David continues in that great campaign against the surrounding nations to expand his borders and to conquer the nations and to bring the wealth of the nations unto Yahweh. In 2 Samuel 8, verse 9, we read, "When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had smitten all the hosts of Hadadezer, then Toi sent Joram his son unto King David to salute him and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and smitten him. For Hadadezer had wars with Toi, and Joram brought with him vessels of silver, and vessels of gold, and vessels of brass, which also King David did dedicate unto Yahweh, with the silver and gold that he had dedicated of all nations which he subdued, of Syria and Moab, the children of Ammon, the Philistines, and of Amalek, and the spoil of Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah." So he didn't conquer that nation. He didn't conquer Toi, king of Hamath, but Toi heard what David was doing and came to thank him for conquering this nation that had been a thorn in his side forever. And David said, "You're welcome. Thank you very much. I don't need that. That's going in for Yahweh's house." So unknowingly, they donated to the work of Solomon's temple. Incidentally, in order to get that much gold, I'll give you an idea of how long that might take to mine that much gold, unless you're very fortunate and you find a nice, thick, solid vein of gold. They're interested in putting together a mine for gold and copper in a town nearby us in British Columbia, just outside of Kamloops, I think it is. And they're estimating that it will produce 247,000 ounces of gold per year, operating for 20 years. I think, if I've done my math right, that's only about 226 talents. 103,000 talents is what David put together. So the nations around him are in abject poverty now, because all the money is in Yahweh's house. He's taken it all. There's nothing left. 103,000 talents, and with modern machinery and processes for washing it and recovering every last tiny microgram, they're only estimating 226 talents from this mine. Absolutely staggering what David was able to accomplish. Now the rest of 1 Chronicles 29, the bulk of it has to do with the prayer of David as he thanks God for the opportunity to participate in this work. And we have the powerful example that he begins with, where he says in verse 11, "Thine, O Yahweh, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heaven and in the earth is thine. Thine is the kingdom, O Yahweh, and thou art exalted as head above all." So just as when David brought in the ark and he danced before it in an ephod, not in the robes of a king, but in the ephod, and Michal looked down and she hated him for being so shameful as she saw it. But David was happy to rejoice before his king and to shed the robes of a king, knowing that the one that he admired as his own king was far greater than he could ever be. So here at the end of his life, as he is passing on the charge of the great work which he has participated in for most of his life, he once again recognizes that he is not the head. He is not the king. His is not the glory or the majesty or the throne, but they are all God's. Thou art exalted as head above all. And even with this vast storehouse of riches laid before him, and the details of it being handed over to Solomon, here's an account of the great work that I have done for Yahweh, my son. Continue the good work. He says to his God, "Riches and honor come of thee. Thou reignest over all. In thy hand is power and might, and in thy hand it is to make great and to give strength unto all. I haven't done anything. This is all God's work. I've simply been his tool. He has pointed me, he has directed me, he has corrected me, and he has supported me to fulfill this work. Verse 14, who am I? What is my people that we should be able to offer so willingly after this sort? For all things come of thee, and of thine own have we given thee. A prevalent theme throughout Scripture that nothing is ours. All we can do is use what God has given us and return it back to him. And that's really all God desires of us. Whether it be the knowledge of his truth, which he's blessed us with, whether it be the physical blessings we enjoy in our daily lives, our physical health, our abilities which he's blessed us with, all he asks is that we use them according to his will to offer back to him a sacrifice of praise. As we continue through, he talks about how though they are, we know at this point, established in the land, he says, we are strangers before thee and sojourners, as were all our fathers, recognizing the shortness of the lives which we have to live. Our days on the earth are as a shadow, there is none abiding. Yahweh our God, all this store that we have prepared to build thee an house for thine holy name cometh of thine hand, and is all thine own. He's recognizing right through that though I have suffered, as he says, in my trouble, I have prepared for the house of Yahweh. It's really all Yahweh's anyways. I haven't gathered it. I haven't done anything to create it. I haven't made it. I'm simply putting it all together in one place through his direction. And I couldn't even do that if he wasn't with me. So he continues on, I know, in verse 17, I know also, my God, that thou triest the heart and hast pleasure in uprightness. And this is really the core of the matter. This is what God really desires in his servants. And certainly David recognized this at the zenith and the close of his life. As for me, in the uprightness of mine heart, I have willingly offered all these things. And now have I seen with joy thy people, which are present here, to offer willingly unto thee. David stands there, not saying to the people, look how great I am, you should be like me. But saying, look how great the work is for God, we should do this. And here's what I've done. Are you willing to offer as well? And they were, in abundance. And it gave him joy to see that the power of God in David's life to offer willingly to his God is also in the people to offer willingly to their God. Not that he was overjoyed that his people were like him, but he was overjoyed that God's hand was just as effective in their lives to give them a willing heart to offer as it was in his own life. So he starts to bring his prayer to a conclusion in verse 18, where he says, O Yahweh, Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel our fathers, keep this forever in the imagination of the thoughts of the heart of thy people, and prepare their heart unto thee. Do you know where David's mind was when he said that? If we were to trim off some of the passages there in that verse, and we just said, the imagination of the thoughts of the heart, where are we? We're in the time of Noah, when the imaginations of the thoughts of their hearts were only wicked continually. And he's saying, keep this in the imagination of the thoughts of their hearts forever, because this is when their heart is right before thee. And that's what matters. Help them to keep this in their hearts, that they might always have a right heart before thee. And lastly, appealing for his son, give unto Solomon my son a perfect heart, to keep thy commandments, thy testimonies, and thy statutes, and to do all these things, and to build the palace for the which I have made provision. And as much as we might want to say, wouldn't we all desire a similar thing for our son, and say similar prayers to give them a perfect heart for our children, for our young people in the ecclesia, as they come up to an understanding of the truth. Give them perfect hearts to keep thy commandments, thy testimonies, and thy statutes. How powerful it would be for Solomon to stand there, to see his father who was on his deathbed, stand before the congregation and pray for him, and to recognize the greatness of the role that he had to fulfill. And of course, there's many connections we can make from 1 Chronicles 29 to look at how the Lord himself uses 1 Chronicles 29 as a template when he is asked by his disciples, teach us how to pray. And many of the themes that are developed by King David here show up in that ideal prayer that is revealed through David's greater son. But if we finish our class for this afternoon and our day by looking at verses 26 to 28 of 1 Chronicles 29, we see the falling away of the sweet psalmist of Israel and the changing of the guard, as it were, and the great work that will begin. 1 Chronicles 28, verse 26. Thus David, the son of Jesse, reigned over all Israel. And the time that he reigned over Israel was 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron. 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem. And he died in a good old age, full of days, riches, and honor. Solomon his son reigned in his stead. And we pray over the next few days to be able to consider the work as it continued. For as David's eyes laid on sleep, the ark still rested behind curtains, and the great work of the temple was about to begin.